In 1928, Colombian troops opened fire on striking United Fruit workers.
Then Guatemala tried redistributing unused land. United Fruit's holdings became a flashpoint, and in 1954, a CIA-backed operation helped overthrow President Jacobo Arbenz.
Decades later, Chiquita admitted illegal payments to Colombia's AUC. In 2024, a federal jury found it liable.
Let's start right off the bat with an absolutely massive number, $38.3 million. That is the exact amount a Florida jury recently ordered a fruit company to pay for financing death squads. I know, it sounds literally like the plot of a Hollywood thriller, but this is a very real and very sobering piece of modern history. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to unpack a century-long story all about corporate accountability. We're tracing an incredibly dark and fascinating history from 1910 all the way to a landmark 2024 verdict. We are looking directly at the fruit that might be sitting in your kitchen right now, specifically Chiquita Brands International, and we're examining their deep, highly controversial footprint in Latin America. So let's dive into the central mystery here. How on earth did a company famous for providing innocent snacks to the world end up entangled with paramilitary violence in Colombia? It's a massive question of human rights liability, and it took lawyers and victims nearly 2 whole decades to finally unravel it in court. Section 1, a historic 2024 verdict. To understand the immense scale of this, we really have to look first at the stunning legal decision that finally brought this history into the glaring light of accountability. In June of 2024, after 17 grueling years of litigation, a U.S. court reached a massive milestone in international justice. They found Chiquita Brands International liable for paying at least $1.7 million to the AUC. Now, the AUC was a designated terrorist and paramilitary organization, and these payments happened between 1997 and 2004. The jury determined this financing was done deliberately and for profit, contributing directly to severe human rights violations in Colombia's banana-growing regions. And we have to note just how rare this is. For a multinational corporation to actually be held liable for international human rights abuses in a U.S. court, it's historically unprecedented. Section 2, Rise of the Octopus. But to truly grasp how a multinational corporation reached the point of funding armed groups, we need to rewind exactly 1 century and look at the origins of Chiquita, back when they were known as the United Fruit Company. Back then, they were known as El Pulpo, the octopus, and they got this nickname because United Fruit wasn't just a business. They operated essentially as a state within a state. They controlled ports, railways, telegraph systems, and they even influenced the drafting of national laws across Central and South America. In fact, this immense, sprawling power is exactly where the term banana republic comes from. Fragile states that are completely dependent on a single export and heavily dominated by foreign capital. For decades, a very clear historical pattern emerged. Basically, whatever the company's profits or tax breaks were threatened, severe consequences followed. From funding a mercenary overthrow in Honduras in 1910 just to preserve tax breaks, to major crises in Colombia and Guatemala, human rights were frequently treated as just a minor operational expense. The crucial tipping point in 1928 was a tragedy known as the Banana Massacre. Striking workers in Cienega, Colombia were demanding incredibly basic human rights. We're talking things like 6-day work weeks, hygienic dormitories, and actually getting paid in real money instead of company coupons. Well, after the company refused to negotiate, the Colombian army opened fire on a Sunday crowd of workers and their families. Depending on the historical record you look at, anywhere from 47 to 2,000 people were killed. And meanwhile, telegrams from U.S. officials at the time actually justified the violent crackdown by labeling the labor strike as communist. Section 3, Coups and Cold War. This brings us right into the 1950s, a period where the global tensions of the Cold War provided the ultimate geopolitical cover for protecting corporate assets. The scale of inequality here was just staggering. Think about this. In 1950s Guatemala, just 2% of the population controlled 72% of the land. The United Fruit Company alone hoarded 42% of the nation's entire arable land. And the craziest part is, much of it was intentionally left uncultivated just to control market prices. So when Guatemala's democratically elected president, Jacobo Arbenz, attempted to pass some modest agrarian reforms, specifically a decree to buy back that unused land to distribute to impoverished peasants, United Fruit aggressively pushed back. In a move that honestly sounds like an unbelievable historical heist, they hired the legendary public relations pioneer Edward Bernays to wage a massive propaganda war in Washington, framing Arbon's land reforms as a dangerous communist threat to American interests. The result of all that intense lobbying was Operation PB Success. In 1954, the CIA orchestrated a coup that deposed President Arbon's, which effectively protected the fruit company's land holdings. While the corporation's assets were secured, the aftermath for Guatemala was absolutely devastating, plunging the country into decades of civil conflict and authoritarian rule. Section 4. Funding Colombian death squads. Fast forward back to Colombia in the modern era, where relying on foreign intelligence morphed into something much more covert in the banana-growing regions. Instead of relying on foreign interventions, Chiquita began making regular illicit payments directly to local guerrilla and right-wing paramilitary groups, operating right inside their plantation zones. As the AUC paramilitaries wrested control of these regions in the 1990s, they essentially became the violent enforcers of the area, and Chiquita just put them straight on the payroll. Section 5, the Chiquita Papers. The absolute smoking gun that tied corporate liability to these human rights abuses was unearthed in a massive trove of internal, declassified memos. And this is where we hit a massive contradiction at the heart of the legal case. When investigated, Chiquita's defense was that they were simply victims of extortion, forced to pay up just to protect their employees. But their own internal memos told a completely different story. Legal documents from 1994 and 2000 admitted to a mutually beneficial quid pro quo. The company was actively receiving security personnel and information on guerrilla movements in direct exchange for their money. If we actually follow the money, it reveals exactly who was on Chiquita's payroll. We can see tens of thousands of dollars budgeted for guerrillas and government-sponsored convivir militias. Company accountants actively tried to conceal these transactions, officially logging them as sensitive payments or citizen security and literally burying them in managers' expense accounts. And the deception went even further than that. A March 2000 memo reveals that Santa Marta-based paramilitaries actually formed a front company called Inversiones Manglar. This pseudo-legal entity was created specifically to disguise the real purpose of these security payments, so they knew exactly what they were funding. Section 6. The End of Impunity. Bringing it all back to the present day, we have to ask, what does this actually mean for the future of corporate accountability? Well, initially, accountability was pretty scarce. Back in 2007, Chiquita agreed to a plea deal with the U.S. Justice Department. They admitted to paying a designated terrorist organization and paid a $25 million fine. However, prosecutors entirely overlooked the evidence that the company actually benefited from the transactions. Because of this, the 2007 deal resulted in absolutely zero individual accountability for the executives involved. It was widely seen by critics as a mere slap on the corporate wrist. But the victims didn't just stop fighting. While the landmark 2024 jury verdict of $38.3 million was a massive win for the 9 families involved in that specific trial, the battle over human rights liability is far from over. There are still over 7,500 people who lost loved ones to the AUC paramilitaries who have similar pending lawsuits against the company right now. The company is likely to appeal, and this legal process could drag on for years. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought from human rights law expert Nelson Camilo Sanchez Leon. The history of El Pobo shows us a century where business interests regularly superseded human life. But this 2024 verdict, it changes the landscape. Will this historic $38.3 million penalty finally put an end to the era of global corporate impunity? Or is it just the first small step in a much, much longer fight for justice? Thank you so much for exploring this with me today.